Hello everybody. Thank you for joining today's installment of Spartan Speaks. My name is Dr. Mike Mudrick. I'm a faculty member in the Sport Management program at York College of Pennsylvania, and today I'll be talking about sport fandom and some of the underlying influences that drive our peculiar behavior as sport fans. This talk is titled, Sports Fans, Are We Really Just Rooting for Clothes? I took this from a famous line of comedian Jerry Seinfeld's, in which Seinfeld once claimed that, as sports fans, we're really just rooting for laundry, and that no matter who is wearing the clothes, as long as the clothes represent our team, we're really just rooting for the uniform. Is Seinfeld accurate in that statement? Perhaps, but we'll dive into the theories and complexities related to sport fandom in this presentation, and we'll examine why certain consumers are so attached to certain uniforms, along with why they have such a distaste for others. For starters, our choice of teams and athletes to support, they're often driven by two socio and psychological theories, social learning theory and social identity theory. Now, I'll do my best not to bore you with complicated theory jargon, but we'll get started by discussing social learning theory, which was originated many years ago by famous psychologist Albert Bandura. Social learning theory focuses on the impact of role modeling on behavior. As youngsters develop in life, they tend to emulate the individuals whom they spend much of their time with. These folks are considered to be role models. In the early years, role models typically consist of immediate family. So how does this relate to fan choice behaviors? Well, if you grow up in a household that supports a certain team, it's likely that the children will follow suit and emulate those fans. So between watching teams play on television, or in person with family, or seeing relatives wear team-related apparel, youth are likely to place a value on those behaviors and seek to replicate that because they want to emulate those role models. Furthermore, scholarly work has also found that as kids grow older and become exposed to more things, particularly in the media, they develop new role models. Certainly, kids who participate in sport and consume sport are going to be more aware of the role models in sport that exist and are likely to attach themselves to some of the biggest stars in sport. That's where captivating athletes like LeBron James, Steph Curry, and Patrick Mahomes come into play. Kids see them, are dazzled by how great they are, and they want to emulate them. Thus, they become fans. This was perfectly illustrated in the early 90s with the slogan, "Be like Mike," as kids adored Michael Jordan and sought to be like him. I've also found in prior research that video games may also play a media role toward inciting youth attachment to certain players. With the influx of the Madden and NBA 2K series, it was no surprise that the players that kids often selected, to play in these games, they chose these players because they were so good in these games. And then these players were often listed as a kid's favorite player. So for instance, in the early to mid-2000s, Falcons quarterback Mike Vick was essentially impossible to defend in the Madden football series. It's reasonable to then suggest that kids playing as Vick in that game morphed into Vick and Falcons fans as a result of that media influence. However, what if our favorite star athlete changes teams? That certainly happens quite often nowadays, right? How does that relate to Seinfeld's comment about just rooting for our team's clothes? LeBron James is a great example of this. He certainly drew much fanfare upon coming to the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2003 as one of the most heralded basketball prospects ever. Then, 7 years later, when he moved on to the Miami Heat and took his talents to South Beach, many of his fans followed suit and changed their team loyalties. Since then, he's gone back to Cleveland and now is in his second year with the Los Angeles Lakers. So in the case of folks who are attached to LeBron James, there's a good chance they've rooted for 3 different pieces of laundry during his NBA tenure. Hopefully they held on to the Cavaliers attire between stints with the team. Now, we'll move on to social identity theory. As mentioned, tenets of social identity theory provide an understanding for why fans certainly root for clothes. Specifically, It can play a role in telling us who a fan supports, why they support that team, but also why they dislike certain teams and athletes. In simple terms, social identity theory is based on concepts of group membership and corresponding behaviors. In life, we assimilate with and join certain groups, whether that's a religious group, some sort of civic group, whatever. Certainly, sport teams represent groups as well. And so everyone who is a part of that group is considered to be an in-group member, be it personnel on the team, fellow fans. They all comprise one collective in-group with that team. As such, fans and personnel of other teams are then considered to be out-group members. So if you're a part of the Pittsburgh Steelers in-group, anyone who is a Ravens fan, even if it's a friend or a family member, is considered to be a member of the out-group. And so we're constantly judging others based on whether or not they are in the in-group or they're in the out-group. However, it's more than just being a member of that group too. The more one places value in that membership, the more we are identified with that group. As a result, we endorse the group's practices and tangibly support the group. These are the folks we refer to as highly identified fans, our avid fans who, as a great sport marketing textbook once claims, they think more, they feel more, they do more. However, our affiliation with sport teams may very well likely be a result of membership with a community. So if you're a resident of a city, there's a likelihood that you're going to endorse the success of the sport teams that represent that city. The same goes with college athletics. If you go to an institution, often you root for the success of its athletic programs as a reflection of your institutional connection. However, as mentioned, the more you value your membership as a member of that community, the more likely you are going to see that team's success as a reflection of your group membership. So if being a Philadelphian or a student at the University of Connecticut, if they have substantial meaning to you, then your desire to support their sport teams will likely have a corresponding increase. And as a result, you want to see that representing sport team have success because it's your in-group success. We call this vicarious achievement. That person did not play for that successful team, but through that team's success, one interprets it as their success through that group affiliation. It's also why sport fans are prone to referring to their favorite teams as we when they are successful. And let's be honest, are you more likely to wear your favorite team's attire the day after a win? I think so. This is what we call burging, an act of basking in reflected glory. You are deliberately doing this to send a message to those in the out-group that your in-group is successful and, in essence, better than theirs. Social identity theory also explains why we dislike other athletes and teams. In most cases, fans don't just dislike opponents because they are competing against your team. There's more to it. They're more likely to have a distaste for teams or athletes who are considered to be a threat to their team's success. Again, this is all about preserving the image of the in-group. So as a Philadelphia Flyers fan, I certainly do not like the New Jersey Devils, but I really have a distaste for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Why? Because they've been so good over the years. Because they're an in-state rival who's won 3 Stanley Cups over the past 12 years. So my level of dislike is a product of the level of threat I see of that team. The same goes for their star player, Sidney Crosby. I don't care for him because he plays for the Penguins, but I also don't like the fact that he whines incessantly throughout the game. But let's be honest, he's also one of the best to ever play the game. And he always seems to have his best games against my team. So that exacerbates the dislike. If he was a scrub, I probably could care less. Similarly, you'd think, as a Philly fan, that I can't stand Boston teams. Yes and no. I don't see the Red Sox as a threat to the Phillies because they don't play in the same league, let alone the same division, and they've never played each other in a World Series to truly see the other side as a threat to the Phillies' success. But the Bruins don't like them one bit. They'll likely be battling with the Flyers for the division title this year. Thus, they're seen as a threat. The Celtics, they always seem to have the Sixers number, and they're going to be competing against them for years to come. And let's not talk about their general manager fleecing the Sixers in trades over the years. And while the Patriots aren't in the same division or conference as the Eagles, similar to what the situation that the Bruins and the Celtics are in, it's obvious that many fans despise the Patriots because of their ridiculous amount of success over the past 2 decades. Again, it all ties back to perceiving an outgroup to be a viable threat. Back in the late 80s, when the Patriots were a dreck of a franchise, nobody felt that way about them. People didn't despise Steve Grogan like they do Tom Brady. So hey, if you're a fan of our team that's universally hated, take it as a compliment. It often means you're relevant. Your in-group is relevant. And people are fearful of how good your in-group is because they are a threat to their in-group. Nonetheless, it's more than just supporting the team that represents your geographic or your institutional group. With social identity theory, we also have to consider that groups typically have prototypes for what is considered to be a value within that group. So, for instance, a religious group, they may have common core beliefs, and the in-group is going to be more embracing of folks who endorse those beliefs. So, from a sport perspective, we often see fans become more attached to athletes or even coaches who strongly represent aspects of the in-group's values. For instance, the late great basketball coach at Temple University, John Chaney, embodied the institution. His teams were tough, they were often underdogs, they played scathing defense to make up for the fact that they typically lacked prolific recruits. In fact, Chaney used to say he specifically sought players who had teeth in their stomach. That absolutely resonated with the school, the city of Philadelphia, and its values. A gritty, no-frills inner-city school in a very blue-collar city. So it's reasonable to suggest that fans are more likely to support teams that represent the communities that they identify with. And they're also more likely to become attached to in-group members who espouse those certain core values. So within the uniform, there are more complexities to consider. Yes, a Sixers fan like myself naturally rooted for Allen Iverson because of his clothes, meaning his Sixers uniform. But there was more to his allure. His barely 6-foot frame, his ability to take on any opponent, his reckless abandon on the court, leaving it out there every night, saying he sought to play every game like it was his last. That resonates in a city that prefers hard work over flash. And based on those types of players, there's an increased likelihood that fans like myself will continue to root for those players, even after that move onto other teams also means that they're going to wear different clothes. So what are the takeaways from this talk? Well, certainly Seinfeld was on to something. We are often allegiant to whomever wears our team's clothes, but there's so much more to it. The degree to which we identify with the team or the player, it's often a product of our social identities. And that passion, it can't be matched by other products in society. As I say to students in class, do you get that upset if your favorite soda or toothpaste lets you down? Not really. But the emotional bond that we have with sport teams and athletes, that's something that's rich in emotion, and we can't put a value on that. How many of us are visibly upset the Monday morning after our favorite NFL team loses? And how many times do we have an extra pep in our step, after they win? And who's to say it can't go the other way? What if your team acquires an unlikable, controversial player? Who's to say that fans won't choose another set of clothes to support as a result? It's also why studying sport has such tremendous value in society. Yes, these are conversations that friends can bicker over at a local watering hole. But the emotional attachment and the degree of fervor that consumers have towards sport, it's second to none. And it absolutely serves as a viable setting for applying traditional theories of psychology. It just becomes more obvious the more we think about it. So, with that said, thank you for taking part in this talk. I hope you found it insightful, accurate, more importantly, enjoyable. I'd love to continue this conversation in the future if so desired. I can be reached at M and then my last name Mudrick, so MUDRICK @ycp.edu. Thanks again. Take care.